Hi YouTube, welcome to my channel. This is Courtney. Thank you very much for joining me. I want to discuss a series of 6 original short stories produced by Amazon. They come as audibles, but you can also read them. It's called Black Stars Galaxy of the New World. They're featuring all Black characters and books that all preach some sort of message. I want to first commend the illustrators for such vibrant, beautiful colors. I really appreciate it. I also have some fingernail polish that I'm trying to remove, and in honor of these books, I'm painting my fingernails black. First story is The Visit by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly. But it's set in an alternate society in which gender roles are reversed and males are the more subordinate gender. So you have Obina, whose wife is really rich, and he's a stay-at-home dad, and he's awaiting the arrival of his friend Eza, who's coming from America. Obina is in Nigeria. So they both grew up in Nigeria together. Eza was the more vibrant, handsome of the two, and Obina is more of the, submissive kind of plain type. So, like I said, Obina is waiting the arrival of Eza, and he's really, really nervous that his friend is going to come and judge him. So Eza arrives, and him and Obina start talking about just what's going on in society, about how males feel like they don't have any rights, about how they are not involved in the political process, about how they're undervalued, about how men aren't even allowed to masturbate. Apparently it's considered illegal. Talking about how medical community is geared more towards females, so they feel like the males are being undertreated. They're talking about how males don't have representation inside of the political arena, and they're saying that they're not considered a valued part of the reproductive process, and because the women are giving certificates to commemorate how they were part of the reproductive process and the males just considered an entity. So it's really interesting how Obina has a very traditional sense about what's going on. He embraces the role that he's in, although he wouldn't mind something different. He embraces that role and that status quo. Whereas you have Eza, who is more than willing to challenge that and would like a change. So then Eza tells Obina, hey, why don't we go to a club? But Obina doesn't even want to go to the club because he says, I can't go out without my wife. That's not the way you're supposed to do things. So Eza convinces him to go. They have a good time. Obina sees what freedom is like and really enjoys that. And on the way back, they're stopped by the cops, who actually think they're prostitutes because they're out without women. And I think that's very interesting because I want to know, what were they wearing that the cops actually think that they're prostitutes? But that's another story. So they get back to the house and the children are in bed. So Obina's freaking out. Where are the kids? Where are the kids? And he finds them in the nanny's room. And the nanny says, well, you weren't home and the kids were alone, so I brought them into my room. So I think Obina feels a bit judged by that. And Eza tells him, oh, you're only upset because you feel guilty because you went out without the kids and did something for yourself. That whole man guilt. So I think that's pretty interesting. And then Obina tells Eza, okay, you go to bed. We're done for the night. And then he goes to bed, and that's how the book ends. So I think overall this book is really good. It talks about, a lot of gripes that I think women had before the women's rights movement, and I think that they still have today, of not being valued, maybe not having their opinions taken serious, not feeling like they have a choice over their body, especially when it comes to birth control, because they're the ones that carry the children, but at the same time, you have male politicians telling them about their right to an abortion or whatnot. Whereas in this book, you have women telling men what they can and cannot do with their body. I think another part of the book that I found interesting was that Obina's wife is having an affair. She even comes home with hickeys on her neck from other men, and she stays out late in these mysterious meetings, yet Obina doesn't say anything. And when in the past he brought it up to his family, they told him that he shouldn't say anything. She makes a good wage and brings it home and takes care of him and the kids. So who is he to argue? And he actually wants to get a job, but his wife tells him, no, you've been out of the workforce so long, you're not valued. I don't want people to look down upon me because you're going to get some entry level job. So why don't you just volunteer somewhere? And he had a chance to have a legitimate career. She said that his poems will never be great. So he never even attempted to try to apply for any sort of advanced schooling to help himself out more. So that goes to show you that people can beat you down and your self-esteem can get low to where you feel like you can't even help yourself. So I thought this book was a really good book to show the reversal of genders and how the other side may feel. I also think that it has some really fun parts, like when Obina's dad tells him that if he's not married by the time he's 28, he's like a deflated bicycle tube, or when Obina is making fun of the American president's weave. That was hilarious. Don't come for her weave. Let her make it. The next book you have is called Black Pages by Nnedi Okorafor. It starts with Al-Qaeda, that is a terroristic organization of fundamentalist Islamists who basically terrorize and incite violence against non-Islamic communities in order to advance their ideology. So you have Pharaoh who's standing outside of a library that's being burnt, and she's talking about this book that is very important, that shouldn't be burned, and that it's not any coincidence that she hasn't and is not being burned. Then you skip to Isaka. Isaka is this African-born, American-educated young man who's just returned back from America to visit his family in the midst of all this Al-Qaeda attack. And he sees the library being burned. He gets on a bus and travels to see his family that's in Timbuktu, just kind of in the middle of nowhere. But the town is called Timbuktu. And he goes to see his family and he's very happy to be back in town, but he's still very much Americanized. He keeps talking about how his cell phone, he's looking for a signal, how his iPad, he's looking for a signal. And he goes and sees his family and he realizes that his father has hoarded all of these books from the library. His dad tells him that the jihadists, that's the terroristic organization, is trying to suppress free thinking. The Quran doesn't believe in worshiping idols, and that these books and statues and all the things that the terrorist organization is tearing down are basically idols, and that's the reason why they're doing that. His dad tells him that he wants him to bring these books back to America, put it in his luggage, that way they're in safekeeping. However, Isaka's like, I can't take these books back to America. I barely got here myself. All the trouble I had to get through was planes, trains, and automobiles just to get here. However, his dad says, look, this is bigger than you. You need to help out. But he's reluctant to do so. So he goes back into his room and he's wondering why he gets perfect Wi-Fi signal. And he finds this furry book inside of his backpack and he keeps finding this blue pearl icon on his iPad. So he's confused, but he's just kind of laying there. And then he hears this big commotion and stuff. And all of a sudden, Al-Qaeda comes in and his mom pushes him to the other room to save him because she knows that everybody's about to get killed. And she tells him, Isaka, you have to run. She tells him power must be guarded. Your dad was the keeper of the books and I'm the keeper of the black pages. But he doesn't really understand what that means. And then Pharaoh appeared. Pharaoh apparently is kind of like this ancestral god, if you will. At least that's the way that I interpreted it. But she hides him away from the house, and then she tells him that black book is our history. It's black because it's so full of all of our history that the pages don't have any space for anything else. And then all of a sudden he understands that that's his new role, that he's taken over from his mother as the keeper of the black pages. And then they walk off together. So that's the end of the book. Now this book, I felt at times I understood and other times I don't. I feel like it's your history defines you and you carry it with you wherever you go. And so you can't run away from it. So even though Isaka went to America, he still came back to his hometown in Timbuktu and still has a responsibility to carry that history and have it be told. Because when it gets lost, then you can't get that back. I just felt the book was very abstract. I think that this is a book that is probably much better read than actually doing as an audible. I would be very interested to hear what you had to say. Please leave me a lot of comments below. I'm not a scholar by any means. I'm just somebody that likes a good story. And I did think this was a very good story. I think the author is a very good poet. The way she described the fire and things around Pharaoh, I think was incredibly beautiful. But I did enjoy it. The next book is called 2043, A Merman I Should Turn to Be, and it's by Shawl. Now, this was a very interesting book. Okay, so you have these things called nannies that allow people to be able to breathe underneath water for long periods of time. And then you have these headsets that allow them to communicate with each other. In this book, which is set in the year 2043, Black people have been giving reparations for slavery, as well as those reparations extended to anybody else that's a person of indeterminate origin. So pretty much it seems like anybody can get reparations. So it really doesn't mean anything. So that's an interesting concept in itself. So anyway, so these reparations that Black people are given seem like they're under the condition that they be moved to these underwater communities. And these underwater communities, you get 40 acres and a mule. Now, the concept 40 acres and a mule is very interesting, and I actually had to look up the history of that. It's a special order given during the Civil War by General Sherman that stated that every freed family would be guaranteed up to 40 acres of land so they can start their new life. However, that order was rescinded about 3 months later after Abraham Lincoln was killed. So, not too long. So, in this story, you have Katerina and you have Darden, who are traveling to one of these underwater communities that's off the coast of South Carolina. This one's called Bahari. So on their way traveling down on their mules, they are attacked. And so you have someone named Joa who comes up and saves them. And he basically brings them into Bahari, the underwater community. Now, Joa tells them that it was the Coast Guard that attacked them. They perform a concert, and during the concert, they're attacked again by the Coast Guard. Joa brings him to his underwater community for safety. And then he explains that the Coast Guard really, hasn't attacked them in a long time, but that's something that, is talked about all the time. So it's always that threat that they're going to be attacked from above. Now, what's interesting about their community is that you have this underwater community. However, it's surrounded by private land. And there's a time window that you can cross this private land. And if you're crossing it outside of that private land, then the Coast Guard has every right to snatch you up. However, Joa is part of that welcome committee that makes sure that people are able to safely be transported to this underwater community within that time frame, because that's sabotaged by the Coast Guard. So that's an interesting concept there. The day after the attack, Darden goes to his 40 acres and he starts, surveying the land, trying to figure out what he can do with it. And then Katerina comes up. He can't communicate with her on the headset, and he's wondering why. So she does a little mic tap, do something, all of a sudden they can hear. So he's trying to figure out what's going on. What is revealed later on by Katerina is that people are listening on the headsets that they got from the surface. So the Black people down in Bahari have actually created their own special headsets so they can communicate amongst themselves, so that they don't always have to have somebody else trying to figure out what it is that they're trying to do. Almost like their own language. She tells him, you know what? There's a unique opportunity here for us to make some money. So why don't we do that? And they start looking at the streaming platform and realize that they have a very huge demographic of white people. White people might not want to live in the underwater communities, but they're very curious about what the Black people are doing. So they want to keep tabs on them. So Katerina says, why don't we capitalize on that? So she wants to build a big hotel, give tours, and also build a big old stage so that they can, become famous and everything with their band. They get in contact with an architect and they're going over the plans, and they say that their backers are basically white people from this Race America movement. And she asks, but I thought these people didn't like black people. And he says, oh, they only think they do. We're basically going to change their mind. And he goes, just because they're enemies don't mean that we don't want the same things. And that's how it ended. So I thought this book touched on a lot of different subjects plaguing the African American community, where my standpoint comes from, in that Black people are still considered a threat, no matter how benign, no matter how far we are. And that is disconcerting, that you can't live your life without some sort of interruption. And in this book, it's interesting because you have Black people that are basically segregating themselves, kind of a forced segregation, but it's segregating themselves and are only too happy to be able to do that. However, they still have that interference from the people on the land. And so they don't really feel like they can live in peace. Due to that, they take on investors from people that really don't want to deal with them. However, eventually those people will probably come down there if they don't. So in the end, Black people are trying to turn this negative, this area where nobody wants to be at in the depths of the water, they're trying to turn that into a positive to build a community for themselves. It's almost like building a whole new world from the world that they were taken from, that didn't accept them. And now they get their own. However, it's not a peaceful world when you have other people constantly checking up on it. So that is why they created their own little headset. This book was very good. I think that it pinpoints a lot of issues that I think Black America still face today, and why maybe some whites have reservations about things, whether that's founded or not, but why they may have reservations about Black people in their communities. So let me hear from you. Let me see what you think about this book. I want to give a shout out to my man, LaValle Burden, who narrated this book. I have been with you since Star Trek and with Reading Rainbow. Your voice is very soothing and very distinct, and I could hear it each and every day. Before we get to the next book, I wanted to show you my earrings. My sister got me these. Very big. Maybe not my style, but they look cute. The next book is called The Alien Skies by C.T. Rwizi. It's about Nisi and Torero, who are traveling on a spaceship to a planet called Malcolm XB. And it's a planet that they're seeking to explore, but also there was a ship that was sent there decades ago that they didn't hear from. So they're going to go check up on it and see what happens. So along the way, Torero and Nisi are talking about the Vedzimu, which the way I get is like the spirit of the dead. They guide you as one collective being as you progress through your life. Sorry about that. I have no idea what happened to the audio. So pretty much Nisi and Torero are forced to land on Malcolm XB after their ship is destroyed. And then Nisi encounters some strange spore and starts to have anaphylactic shock. They're rescued by a group of humans that tells them they're early settlers to the planet in the early stages of wormhole travel. And they have formed a symbiotic relationship with the spores, which are called the elders. And those spores have now been infused in Nisi in order to keep him alive. LaValle, who is the person that found them, tells Nisi that Torero is not human. Torero is basically an holographic implant that Nisi keeps because Torero died a long time ago and he loves her. So the people on the planet remove the implant and he buries it into the ground underneath a tree. And then LaValle calls him to a meeting and says that the High Council wants to talk with him. So the High Council chairman tells Nisi, we came here to build a home and a future for ourselves, free from the burdens that face us on the old continent. We still remember how we were disenfranchised and made lesser on our own lands, first by foreigners, then our own leaders. We remember how air and water were polluted, our ways of life disrupted by climate change. Greedy nations and corporations plundered the earth while leaving us to languish in poverty. And the fears that the rest of humanity discovered this new world and its wonders, they would do the same here. And so he tells them, hey, things have changed. It's not the same as it used to be. And they go, your presence here is proof that a lot of things have changed and we're going to give you a chance. Tell him that they're going to give him a special ship that's going to allow him to travel back to Earth really, really quickly. And he has to take Aluel with him. Aluel can see for herself if things have changed and report that information back. And then they can make a decision about whether or not they want to open up communication again and not stay hidden. As Masizu and Aluel are traveling out of the stratosphere, all of a sudden this avatar pops up and tells them, we're the avatar of your people, of what your people call the elders. For many years, we've been searching for a way to communicate directly with your species, to learn your song so we may sing together. But something was always missing. We found it in the gift you offered to the soils that sustain us. And that's when he remembers that it's the implant that he planted by the tree after he got it removed. She is part of a benevolent collective bridging the communication gap between two species for the first time in history. So he realizes that Vezimu that Terrell believed in is actually coming to life. There's a quote in the book that says history is a burden, and that could be the history of the people, the history of the planet, the history of your family. And when Aluel's people left their original homeland, they left to go to a new world where they can start fresh without any negative history that traveled with them. When it comes to people of African descent, Africa has a long negative history with the rest of the world due to the aspect of slavery. Africans have been scattered all over the world dealing with their fallout from it for years in many different forms. So when Aluel's people traveled to the new planet, they left that history behind and settled as natives on the new planet and rewrote their history and created something new for themselves, with everyone has a common history with no judgments due to race. Also, the planet that they're on isn't ravaged by climate change or deforestation or anything like that. It's a whole new planet where they can make judgments about what they're going to do with that planet and protect it, whereas conservation on the old world did not value that. Therefore, I completely understand why Aluel's people are concerned about outsiders coming to this new planet and maybe bringing back that old history of negative impacts on the environment and devaluing people based off differences. As far as with the elders being in this symbiotic relationship with Aluel's people, I understand that it allows them both to survive on this planet, but I really didn't get what else more that they got out of that. I mean, there's a voice now where they can communicate with Terrero hologram. So maybe something will come of that. I'm not sure. But I do think it's great that now they can speak something more. But apparently there's some sort of language to begin with that it was somehow communicated that, hey, these spores are killing you. We need to get together and meld, and now we can all live peacefully. So I just think that it's an interesting book, and I think it's a beautiful story. Next book is Clapback by Nalo Hopkinson. It starts with talking about the Forgiveness Project, which is a project by teen girls in Africa to infuse African cloth with a story that talks about their struggle. And through speaking about that struggle, it shows forgiveness. An example is one where a teen girl is forced to marry a man 3 times her age. And she says, I forgive my mom for forcing me to do that. The clothing is supposed to seep into the person's skin for a few days so they can actually tell that story and live it in their soul. And then it's supposed to be peed out. However, you have that, and then you have Agneta Burry, who's this clothing designer in America that utilizes that same concept, but puts it into clothing that she makes millions of dollars with, premiering at Fashion Week. So you have that exploitation going on of that concept. The book starts with Wanda. Wanda is this performance artist that is about to graduate college. And she is upset, and she decides to put on this show in which she has all this racist black memorabilia, like the big black doll with the big old eyes, or the Aunt Jemima syrup bottle, things like that. So she has these things that she's painting with some sort of concoction called Iwin that she created, that makes all these things come to life, and then they jar it out of the studio. Then the next day, she comes back to the studio, and all of these things, or these relics, have brought in other similar relics that they've also infused with that Iwin, and everything's moving. So of course she's fired, and then she deactivates them, so then they no longer move. And then she's sent to jail. Now, in the meantime, you have the Nnedi Burry is found to be a fraud. Apparently, the nannies, which is the little bots that she's infusing inside of the clothes, apparently aren't being peed out by people. They're actually replicating and somehow getting into other people. So, of course, that's causing some sort of catastrophe. And also, the stories that are supposed to be infused in the clothes, that are supposed to be these African girl stories, are actually made up stories by artists that she contracted. So she's considered a fraud. She has to pay a fine, and she has no money. She goes to Wanda, who's serving 10 years in jail because her little relics went out and basically stole relics from other areas. So, of course, people were upset. So now she's serving 10 years in jail. So Nnedi Burry comes to her in jail and asks her, how did you do it? You know, she's real curious. How did you do it? So she tells Nnedi, okay, I'm going to tell you how I did it. However, you need to do two things for me. And she has Nnedi pretty much pay off all the student loans for everybody that was in the class that she graduated with, which is awesome. And also, she wanted Nnedi to remove all the black racist memorabilia from online public auction houses. So once that happened, Nnedi got the little wand. Fast forward a few years, and you have Wanda's granddaughter, Xiomara. Xiomara gets a call in the middle of the night and has to go pick up her husband, who's been a victim of police brutality, where the police use too much force when they shouldn't, for no reason, for stopping in the first place. So granted, he is very upset, and he says, you know, at least I came away with my life and I didn't come up as a statistic like so many other black men do. So they're really upset, and she's like, there has to be a better way. So he goes up to bed, and then she pulls up an avatar of her grandmother. So Xiomara asks her if she still has any of those nanites or anything from before, because she has an idea. She says, whiteness always tries to take everything they want from blackness. Must they have our skins too? What evidence would be left of our authentic selves? And what about everyone else's identities? There are more than just white and black people in the world. They are those already paranoid people who are convinced that whiteness is being bred out of existence would really lose their shit. So basically, she wants to infuse some sort of gene marker into the clothing so that people can see what it feels like, at least for a few days, to feel like what it's like to be another race. No, Wanda's all for it. She's like, you know what? Well, let me know. I can help you figure it out, and I can tell you how to turn it on and off too. So in the end, we have Xiomara who's sitting there wondering if she should do it. I will say that I don't think that the Audible narrator would have been my first choice as far as narrating this book. I just don't feel maybe she was ethnic enough for the voices and the content material. I felt that Wanda's response to black exploitation was very interesting. I think you see that in society a lot, where you have black people will come up with an idea and then white people will capitalize on it. You see that in a lot of the dances you see on TikTok, social media, especially our skin color, hair especially. So I just think there's a lot of good undertones there about black exploitation and how others capitalize on it, however black people are not able to. Xiomara says, wouldn't freeing us be a step towards freeing all humanity? Would dark skin cease to be an axis of violence if everyone had it? So that's an interesting concept. If we all look the same, would we still have bickering amongst ourselves? I think if you look amongst the diversity of the black community that we currently have, yet we still have our differences and our preferences and our prejudices within our own community. I don't know if we all became the same skin color like Xiomara is thinking, that would completely eliminate the issues that we have. But You never know.
I thought it was interesting that this book touched on race relations with the cops and how Black people are sometimes made a target to be harassed for no reason by the cops, and how Black people feel like at times they're powerless in their own lives, and the fact that they walk away with their lives is good enough. And they have to just accept that, where that is a clear violation of their rights, which continues to perpetrate the bad race relations that we continue to have from long ago.
And the last book in this series is called We Travel the Spaceways by Victor LaValle. Now, this is an interesting book. It stars Grimace, who is a homeless man who talks to cans that may or may not be some sort of space communication in some other world. And he's traveling around the streets of New York, and he blows up Black churches with Molotov cocktails that he makes with those cans. And then he goes to a McDonald's and he meets Kim. He's actually trying to steal her cheeseburger at the time, and she calls him on it, which is really, really funny. The book has a lot of comedy in it. And so he meets Kim, who is transgender, that we find out. And they form this unlikely friendship, and which actually turns into a romance. And then he takes her one day to what he does at night, which is blow up churches. So they go to this mosque, I believe, and she realizes that he's about to blow up this church and is like, oh no, I knew you were crazy. I didn't realize you were that crazy. I can deal with some crazy, but not all of the crazy. So she's like, no. And then all of a sudden the can starts speaking to her. And Kim tells him that she believes him, and that lots of people will call them gods, but that's not what they call themselves. They're pathfinders. They don't understand how long it has been since they left the continent we learned to call Africa, the place they knew only as the center of the world, invaded by men who would enslave and indoctrinate. They decided to take to the stars. And she couldn't hear them until he reduced the background noise, and that she's not going to be his partner. And then they're going to go to the astral city, and then they walk off together.
I wanted to jump in and explain myself better because I don't think that I adequately did it in the video. I think that what they're talking about in the book is that the gods have left because when Black people were enslaved, they were just so distraught over what had happened that they really didn't know what to do, which matches exactly how the Black people felt. And the gods have been gone so long, and Black people have not had that oversight, that they're really lost as a people and don't have adequate faith as they should. So Grimace is burning down the Black churches, I think, to kind of quiet down the noise, all the commercialism, all the falseness, or all the things that are in the forefront, to get down to the basics and grab people's attention in order to show true faith.
I think it's interesting that the two people that are in this book are a homeless man and transgender. These are people that, I would consider them meek. So that whole concept of the meek shall inherit the earth, or these people that are having true faith, I think is an interesting concept as well. And in this world, poverty is a big thing, as well as mental illness. You see that a lot. So you have this homeless man that's on the street that people just walk by. They don't want him nearby. And I thought that that was very true to life, and how the author described about how people just kind of pass by homeless people, and as long as they're not in their way, then they're not a bother to them. Whereas in the end, this man is suffering. He's really, really hungry. He talks a lot about chips. I felt his struggle with the chips because I have a problem. I love me some chips. But he talked about how he hasn't eaten in 2 days and he's just starving, starving, starving. However, his faith in what his mission is what's keeping him going. And sometimes that is all you have. I thought it was interesting how in tune that the author is with New York City. You can tell it's a place that's near and dear to his heart, where he talks about all the ins and outs of the neighborhoods and all the key points. One I thought was interesting that I didn't know was a Black settlement called Seneca Village over near Central Park, where basically the people were forced out because the government wanted to make room for Central Park. And lastly, I want to say that there is someone for everybody If you can have a man that's going around talking to cans and he can still attract someone, then I think that there is hope for any and everybody in this world. Let me know what you think about this book. After all, that's part of why I decided to do this channel, so I can discuss some books that I read and get a little bit of feedback. Overall, I thought these books were great and very introspective. Well, thank you very much for listening. I hope that I gave some good insights into these books. If you've read them already, definitely leave me some comments down below so we can discuss this book. After all, that's one of the reasons I did this channel, so I can get a little feedback. Puff, puff, pass. However, if you have not read these books, I hope that you do. I think they're worth reading. They're different. They're deep readings, you know, not something to take lighthearted, which is what I originally thought they would be, but definitely worth reading. And I have also finished my nails. Bye.